Go ahead, walk away. My wealthy husband once claimed I couldn't survive a week without him. So I dropped my keys on the counter of the house he bought. The next morning, his boss and father were in chaos, calling non-stop. Now even the bank won't stop ringing. What exactly did he drive me to do? You wouldn't last a week without me, Mila. Ashton set down his crystal tumbler, the Macallan inside catching the chandelier's light. Without my money, my connections, my protection, you'd be nothing. Just another pretty face serving coffee or answering phones. He straightened his Hermes tie, expecting me to beg or plead. Instead, I reached into my Chanel bag, pulled out Marquise, house, Range Rover, and placed them on the granite counter, one by one. You're right, I said. Let's see. His face paled as I walked out, leaving behind everything he'd ever bought. That was 3 hours ago. Now, I sat in the Ritz-Carlton lobby, watching our penthouse security feed on my phone. Yes, I had access to the cameras, something Ashton never realized. He was pacing our kitchen, picking up the keys, setting them down, calling someone, probably Nathan, maybe his father, not the police, of course. What would he say? My wife left her keys and walked out? The concierge approached with a polite smile. Miss Hawthorne, your suite is ready. My maiden name sounded unfamiliar when I'd used it to book the room that morning, but it was mine. The one thing Ashton couldn't buy or trade. I paid with my own earnings, 6 figures I'd built from what Ashton mocked as my cute little hobby of day trading. He'd brag at parties that I played with stocks like other wives played tennis. None of them knew I'd turned his $10,000 allowance into a fortune that could sustain me for years. The suite was smaller than our penthouse, but far greater in freedom. I set down my single suitcase, the one I'd been secretly packing at the gym for months. Ashton tracked every credit card, but gym visits went unquestioned. Trophy wives had to maintain their worth, after all. My phone buzzed, 17 missed calls. I deleted his contact, watching his name turn into a random number. When a voicemail accidentally played, I heard, Mila, this is ridiculous. Come home. We'll talk. His voice was calm, practiced, like he was managing an investment, not a marriage. By the 5th message, the composure cracked. You can't just leave. Half of everything is in both our names. You need my signature too. I deleted them all. That morning already felt like another lifetime. I'd woken at 6, alone as usual, Ashton asleep in his study surrounded by trading monitors. The coffee maker was set, another system I'd mastered despite his claims otherwise. Just last month, he'd told dinner guests I couldn't operate a toaster. Everyone laughed, including me, the dutiful wife who knew her part. I'd stood by the window 23 floors up, watching the city wake. The silk robe he'd gifted me for Christmas itched. Wrong size, chosen by his assistant. Today was our anniversary. He hadn't mentioned it, but that was no surprise. On the counter lay a charity luncheon invitation, another event where I'd smile while wives compared vacation homes. Helen Brennan would smirk and ask, still playing with your phone stocks, dear? Never realizing I'd earned more this quarter than her husband's practice. That's when I decided to organize Ashton's study, searching for insurance documents. He was meticulous about that space. The voice recorder on his desk slipped as I reached for files, hitting the floor and playing a recording mid-conversation. She asked to see our investment statements yesterday, Ashton's voice said, followed by laughter. I told her they were too complicated, lots of numbers. She actually believed me. Nathan, I could get her to sign over her kidneys. And she'd just ask which pen to use. My hands shook as I picked it up. The date? Last Tuesday. The same day I'd surprised him at the office with his favorite sushi. He'd introduced me to his new analyst as the beautiful Mrs. Whitmore. Now I understood the smirk on that man's face. The recording continued, That's why this type is perfect. Pretty enough for pictures, simple enough to control, grateful enough to stay quiet. My father taught me well. Marry beauty, rent intelligence. I placed the recorder back precisely where it had been and kept searching. That's when I found the folder marked Prenuptial Amendments, recently notarized with my forged signature. The document stated that leaving without cause meant forfeiting all assets. Standing there, surrounded by proof of his manipulation, I finally saw things clearly. He wasn't just cruel, he was calculated. To him, I was an investment already losing value. From the Ritz suite, I could see our penthouse glowing across the skyline. Ashton was probably tearing through drawers, searching for what I'd taken. But I hadn't stolen anything physical, just copies of documents and evidence uploaded to clouds he didn't know existed. The real victory would come later, legally, through the half of everything he'd placed in my name for tax reasons. When my phone rang again, it was Richard Whitmore, Ashton's father. I ignored it, remembering how he'd introduced me at a party. Ashton's wife, lovely thing, isn't she? As if I were a designer accessory. Then came a text from Margaret, the family secretary. Heard you left. Room 1247 when you're ready to talk. I have 40 years of information you'll want. For the first time in months, I smiled. Ashton said I wouldn't last a week without him. But he never asked what I did with all the time he left me alone. Never wondered why his secretary knew my maiden name. Never imagined his trophy was quietly documenting everything. 7 days. That's all I'd need to prove him wrong. After that, I'd spend the rest of my life proving myself right. The keys I left behind weren't a surrender. They were a declaration. And unlike Ashton, I'd already read every clause in the fine print. 3 weeks passed since that night at the Ritz. I built a new rhythm. Morning trades, afternoon walks through Central Park, evenings spent reviewing the files Margaret sent me, each revealing another layer of Whitmore corruption. But today was different. May 15th, our actual anniversary. Despite everything, I'd agreed to dinner. Just to discuss logistics, Ashton had said in that carefully neutral tone. Let's be civilized. The salon on Fifth Avenue was the same one I'd visited for years. Celeste, my stylist, brushed through my hair. Special occasion? She asked, unaware of the irony. Anniversary dinner, I replied, watching my reflection transform into what Ashton preferred. Sleek, polished, expensive. For years. How wonderful. Where's he taking you? Le Bernardin, I said, his favorite. The waiters knew his wines, the chef his table. I'd even made the reservation myself, knowing he'd forget. The confirmation email sat beside the 17 legal documents my lawyer had prepared for tonight's real purpose. The dress cost $8,000, charged to a card he hadn't frozen yet. Deep blue, his favorite color on me, though he hadn't noticed in months. I studied my reflection. Esley Inch, the perfect wife he'd molded. Except this time, there was a flash drive in my clutch, holding 40 gigabytes of evidence. As I left the salon, my phone buzzed. Slight change, his text read. Nathan and Diana joining us. Need to discuss Singapore deal. Same time. Our anniversary had become a business meeting. I stared out the cab window as the city blurred by and typed one word back. Perfect. He'd never catch the tone buried beneath it. They'd do it to survive. A week later, Ashton left for Singapore. 5 days of business meetings about expanding into Asian markets. Though inside our penthouse, I became someone else. Not the decorative wife, but a forensic digger uncovering evidence of my own downfall. Ashton's office password was painfully sentimental. Our wedding date. His computer opened like a confession booth. Folder after folder revealed time-stamped trades showing clear patterns. Richard would lunch with certain executives, and hours later, Ashton would trade in their companies. Once you knew what to look for, the corruption was obvious. In his locked drawer, The one he thought I didn't know about. I found messages that made me sick. Not just about Diana, but about me. Emails to Nathan describing my mental instability. Plans to have me evaluated by a psychiatrist. The same one who'd testified during Caroline's commitment. My hands didn't shake as I photographed each page, uploading everything to Phantom Rose Holdings' encrypted cloud. When I was done, I returned every item to its exact place. Ashton would come home to an office that looked untouched, while I held evidence that could destroy him. His personal safe hid one final folder. He'd concealed the combination inside a book on Warren Buffett, thinking he was clever. Beyond the cash and gold coins was a file labeled Exit Strategy. It wasn't about business, it was about me. A step-by-step plan to file for divorce, claim abandonment, and hide assets. My removal was plotted like a merger, complete with profit projections. I photographed it all, then sat in his leather chair, gazing out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, Margaret was filing her own reports. Patricia was preparing the next corporate layer, and Ashton was asleep in Singapore, dreaming of empires built on the ruin of women who trusted him. But he was wrong about one thing. I wasn't just another trophy. I was the one holding the hammer. The weight of that invisible hammer felt heavier than his desk. I set it down and stood, catching my reflection in the dark screen, a woman I barely recognized. Sharper and more deliberate than the one who'd walked down the aisle 4 years earlier. The next morning, I went back to my routine at the Equinox on Park Avenue. The pool was my sanctuary, 50 laps of rhythm and chlorine where the world disappeared. I was climbing out of the water when Diana appeared, immaculate in Lululemon, but pale and hollow-eyed. The water when Diana appeared, immaculate in Lululemon, but pale and hollow-eyed. Nathan knows, she said abruptly, glancing around the empty deck, about Ashton's messages. He hired a private investigator, cloned our phones. Water dripped from my hair onto marble. Why are you telling me this? Because whatever you're planning, and don't pretend you're not, these men don't just get angry when cornered. They get even. She lowered her sunglasses, revealing a bruise along her jawline, faint but unmistakable. Nathan's already moving assets offshore. Richard's calling judges he golfs with. They know something's coming. Before I could reply, she was gone, her heels echoing across the wet floor. I sat there, the chlorine stinging my nose, wondering whether her warning was genuine or a test. With these people, compassion and manipulation often looked the same. That evening, Ashton came home with lilies, my least favorite flower, something I'd mentioned only once 3 years earlier. He'd always brought roses before. The lilies meant he was paying attention now. Thought we could have dinner, he said, placing them where my keys used to be, like we used to. We hadn't eaten alone in months. I watched him pour Bordeaux, usually reserved for clients, carefully arranging cheese with uncharacteristic precision. His hands, always steady when signing million-dollar trades. I had mentioned mountains once, on our honeymoon, a trip he'd spent glued to conference calls. The fact he remembered now felt like bait. When? I asked evenly, slicing manchego. Next week, or sooner, tomorrow even. His eagerness gave him away. You seem stressed, Mila. The separation, living in hotels, it's not good for you. He slid a document across the table. New insurance papers, better coverage for both of us. His eyes followed my hand as I lifted the pen, searching for hesitation. Under the table, my phone silently captured every page. Patricia's encrypted app storing each image in Phantom Rose's cloud. 3 days later, my mother arrived from Ohio, escorted by Ashton himself, who'd insisted on picking her up from JFK. He carried her luggage, complimented her haircut, asked about her garden with polished charm. "Oh, honey," she whispered later in the kitchen, while Ashton mixed her drink perfectly. "You didn't tell me things were better. He seems so devoted." The truth pressed against my tongue. "He's performing, Mom. You're the audience. I'm the prop. And this show ends with me gone." Instead, I smiled. "He's full of surprises." That week became a masterclass in performance. Broadway shows he once mocked as a waste of time. Dinners at restaurants that had waiting lists months long, somehow booked that morning. A surprise spa day for us while he handled business. Mom glowed under the attention, tearing up when he toasted her at dinner for raising such an incredible daughter. I watched from across the table, realizing this was Ashton at full power. The charm that built his empire now aimed at convincing my mother I was safe. On her last night, she sat on my bed, holding my hands. "Honey, you've lost weight, and your smile, it's practiced. Are you happy?" Behind her, I saw Ashton's shadow in the hallway, listening. "I'm exactly where I planned to be," I said, loud enough for him to hear, ambiguous enough to be true. After Mum left, Margaret texted to meet somewhere new, the New York Public Library's reading room, where she volunteered teaching immigrants to read. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was surrounded by the city's most powerful illiterates, men who never read the human cost of their contracts. Across the table, she spread newspaper clippings like tarot cards. Elena Whitmore, 1994, drove off a bridge. Clear weather, no skid marks. Caroline Whitmore, 2003, institutionalized for exhaustion, divorced while sedated, disappeared. Jennifer Whitmore, 2015, accused of embezzlement, found bankrupt, last seen in a Detroit shelter. Then she placed 4 photographs in a row. Elena, Caroline, Jennifer, and me. All blonde, between 5'4" and 5'10", and 5'6", delicate, camera-friendly. Richard chooses them, Margaret said quietly. Like auditions. Young, attractive, middle class, impressed by money. Smart enough to hold a conversation, not smart enough to be dangerous. He marries them to Ashton, uses them for image, then disposes of them by year 4, when they start asking questions. "Why year 4?" I asked. "It's long enough to create patterns of instability, short enough to prevent real bonds. By year 5, you're gone or broken." She squeezed my hand, her skin fragile, her grip firm. "You're at 4 years, 3 months. Whatever you're planning, Mila, do it now." Elena waited too long. Caroline fought too loudly. Jennifer trusted the wrong person. I stared at the women who'd worn my name before me, their faces merging into one warning. "What about you, Margaret? Why did you stay?" She paused, aligning the papers with librarian precision. "I was Richard's secretary's daughter. When she died, he offered me the job. I was 19, naive and grateful. By the time I realized what I was recording, I was already trapped. Different kind of prison, but still a cage. Now I'm 62, invisible, but patient." As the library announced closing time, Margaret handed me one final photograph. A young blonde woman, maybe 22. "Who's this?" "Madison Hayes. Richard had lunch with her father last week. She just graduated from Penn. The engagement announcement was expected within 6 months." Margaret's eyes carried 40 years of restrained fury, sharpened into precise focus. "She's the next one, unless we stop them." Madison Hayes's photo burned in my pocket as I walked out of the library, 22 years old, full of promise, and about to fall into the same trap that had already claimed 4 women. I slipped her photo behind my old student ID, the one from before I became Mrs. Whitmore, back when I still had my own name, my own ambitions. And next morning, I made the first withdrawal, $8,000 from our joint account, enough to seem like furniture shopping, not enough to alert Ashton. The teller didn't question it. Mrs. Whitmore buying expensive things was ordinary. I divided the money across 3 banks, turned it into cash, then transferred it to a shell account under Phantom Rose Holdings in Connecticut. Patricia Kim had shown me how to build a convincing paper trail, consulting fees for interior design. "The IRS loves documentation," she'd said, "even if it's fiction, as long as it's properly filed." That evening, Ashton came home later than usual, 9 instead of 7. His tie loosened, jacket gone, and the scent of scotch already on him. I was in the kitchen making tea when he staggered slightly through the doorway. "Lost the Morrison account today," he muttered, pouring himself a drink. "Closer to 4 fingers than 3. 40 million in assets gone. They said compliance concerns. Can you believe that? Compliance." I kept my expression neutral, knowing full well that Margaret had sent anonymous tips to Morrison's compliance officer 2 weeks earlier. "That's unfortunate," I said evenly, watching him down half the glass. "Nathan thinks someone's talking to our clients," he went on, refilling his glass with a trembling hand. "Rumors about an SEC investigation. Ridiculous." The next day, I moved another $12,000. The day after that, 15. When one teller asked, I smiled and said, "My husband wanted me to pamper myself." She nodded knowingly, likely thinking as her own inattentive spouse. Ashton's drinking grew with his losses. Each night a new crisis. Another client gone, another partner questioning him, another rumor of federal scrutiny. He'd pace in his study, calls on speaker, glass in hand. He signed whatever I gave him, power of attorney revisions, trust updates, insurance changes, without reading. His signature deteriorated daily. Thursday morning, Patricia called from an unfamiliar number. "Can we meet today? Urgent." We met at a rest stop on I-95. She looked ordinary, sensible Honda, neat suit, but tension lined her posture. "The FBI contacted me," she said immediately. "They know I represent you. They want to talk." My chest tightened. "How?" "Richard Whitmore has been under investigation for 18 months. A whistleblower named Dennis Chin came forward. They're building a case, but they need someone inside to confirm." She handed me a card, Agent Sarah Coleman. "She asked for you specifically. If you're going to act, do it now. Once the FBI goes public, assets will freeze. Anything unmoved will be tied up for years." That night, I watched Ashton pour his 6th drink before dinner. Calls came non-stop. Nathan, lawyers, crisis managers. Each one made him drink more and sign more. He suspected everyone, but the wife quietly refilling his glass. "Maybe eat something," I suggested, pretending concern while wondering how much longer his liver would last. "Not hungry," he muttered, eyes bloodshot. "You've been different lately." "Therapy," I said smoothly, "learning to accept what I can't change." Saturday came with the dreaded ladies' auxiliary meeting at Riverside Country Club. Helen Brennan and her circle would be there, the same women who'd spent 4 years mocking me. But Patricia's warning had lit a spark. The end was near, the performance almost over. Helen began before I even sat down. "Mila, darling, still playing with your little investment apps?" Her face drained of color. She hadn't known. The other wives leaned in, curiosity replacing condescension. "Some of us," I added, stirring sugar into my tea, "prefer real kitchens to toy ones, and real portfolios to pretend ones." Margaret's lips twitched into a faint smile as she refilled my cup. The meeting went on in uneasy quiet, gossip replaced by glances. By evening, Ashton would hear of this. By morning, Richard would know his daughter-in-law had teeth. But I no longer cared. The countdown had begun, and I was done being underestimated. The explosion came Wednesday. I was in my hotel room when my phone lit up with notifications. Diana had filed for divorce from Nathan, and she had proof. Not just infidelity involving 3 mistresses over 2 years, but also evidence of financial fraud, hidden accounts, and a damning string of emails showing Nathan and his lawyer discussing how to remove Diana from the equation. Ashton called me 17 times in an hour. I answered on the 18th. "What did you tell her?" he demanded instantly. "Tell who?" "Diana. Nathan thinks I leaked information to her. Says you two were friendly at dinners, so you must have told her." I told her nothing, I replied truthfully. Diana had found her own evidence and fought her own battle. We were parallel soldiers, never allies, but on the same field. Through the phone, I heard something crash in his office. He's pulling out of the fund, Ashton said bitterly. 20 years of partnership, gone. He says I betrayed him for a woman. His laugh was sharp, hollow. Wasn't even interested in Diana. She's too old, too sharp. I was just keeping options open. The admission didn't sting. It just went into my mental file labeled Evidence for Patricia. In the background, Nathan's voice erupted. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else. Well, congratulations, Ashton muttered. You've destroyed us both. Then the line went dead. He didn't call again, but an hour later, Margaret texted. Richard called an emergency meeting. All partners. The empire is cracking. I stared at her message for a full minute. Those words, the empire is cracking, glowed on my screen, like prophecy fulfilled. My hands moved automatically, pulling a red wig from my closet. I'd bought it 3 weeks earlier, in cash, from a Queen's costume shop that didn't ask questions. The dress was polyester, off the rack from Target, something no Whitmore woman would ever wear. Dark sunglasses completed the look, someone who didn't exist in their world. Nathan's Madison Avenue office had security that looked strict, but wasn't. I'd been there plenty as Ashton's wife. I knew the guards' lunch breaks. Knew Nathan's assistant, Sarah. Always took 45 minutes to get sushi 3 blocks away. The elevator to the 42nd floor felt endless. In my purse, a manila envelope held printed screenshots of every message Ashton had sent about Nathan. Mockery, contempt, detailed plans to steal clients once the partnership dissolved. But the real weapon was at the bottom. Ashton's financial projections for acquiring Diana post-divorce, complete with calculations about her inheritance and how to access it through marriage. Nathan's door was solid mahogany, his name engraved in gold. I slipped the envelope underneath, heard it glide across the Persian rug, then walked calmly back to the elevator. Security footage would show only a woman, any woman, walking with quiet purpose. 3 hours later, Margaret forwarded me an email from Ashton's assistant. Partnership dissolution letter received from Nathan Chin. Effective immediately. Legal team requesting emergency meeting. The Warwick Hotel on 54th still accepted cash if you had enough. I checked in under Mila Hawthorne. My maiden name felt like armor, something I'd forgotten how to wear. The room was modest but clean. I set up my laptop and the burner phone Patricia had given me. The SEC whistleblower hotline answered after 12 rings. Automated prompts first. Press 1, press 2. As if reporting financial crime were as casual as ordering pizza. Finally, a human voice. Securities and Exchange Commission, Enforcement Division. I need to report systematic insider trading at Whitmore Capital Management, I said steadily. I have 5 years of documented evidence, including time-stamped trades matching non-public information. The agent, Jennifer Liu, listened silently as I explained everything. Richard's lunches with corporate executives, Ashton's precisely timed trades, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the unmistakable pattern. She asked sharp, informed questions. Why are you coming forward now, Mrs. Whitmore? She asked. I looked out the window at Manhattan's skyline, towers built by men like Richard and Ashton. Because I finally understand that silence makes me complicit. And because they're planning to do to another woman what they did to me. After the call, I took Margaret's 40 years of evidence, copied onto 3 drives, and placed one in a Chase safety deposit box, one at Bank of America, and one in Patricia's office safe. The instructions were simple. If anything happens to me, release everything to the FBI, the SEC, and the New York Times. That evening, Richard's black Mercedes pulled into our building's garage. I watched from the penthouse window as he stepped out, his expression caught between fury and fear. He didn't use the doorman. He had his own key, as the man who owned 30% of his son's fund. Where are your books? Richard's voice boomed through the penthouse before he reached Ashton's study. Dad, what? The books, Ashton. I stayed quiet, in the kitchen, preparing coffee, as if nothing were happening. My phone recording from a hallway vase. Nathan's out, Ashton was saying. But we can manage. Nathan's out. Morrison's out. Chin pulled everything this morning. The FBI was at Chen's office asking questions about our trading. That's impossible, Ashton protested. Everything we do is bulletproof, unless someone talked. Richard's tone turned dangerous. You promised me the wives were handled. You said Mila was too stupid to understand what she was signing. She is, Ashton snapped. She doesn't even know how to read a financial statement. I entered with the coffee tray, my expression calm and unreadable. The dutiful wife serving drinks while quietly despising everything around her. Both men looked up. Richard's gaze was cold and evaluative. Ashton's indifferent and sure of himself. Cream? I asked Richard. He ignored me, turning back to his son. Find the leak. Fix it, or we're finished. They worked until 2 a.m, papers covering Ashton's study like tarot cards predicting disaster. I heard the constant hum of his printer, the whir of the Schreger, and phone calls to lawyers charging thousands just to answer at midnight. Ashton had collapsed in his chair, surrounded by the debris of his empire. Contracts beneath his cheek, drool pooling on documents worth millions. The so-called financial genius reduced to a man undone by his own arrogance. Built on the backs of women he thought disposable. I moved through the penthouse one last time, not with sentiment, but with the calm precision of someone already gone. My clothes remained in the closet. Let him explain that to whoever asked why his wife had left everything behind. The jewelry stayed too, the blood diamonds and guilt-laden gold that had never really been mine. In my purse, I carried only essentials, my laptop, my true identification, and the banking information for Phantom Rose Holdings, now holding 50% of our liquid assets, all transferred legally over the past few weeks. I placed the keys on the granite counter, house, car, and safe aligned perfectly. Beside them, a single note on my personal stationery, the expensive kind he'd chosen to project the image he wanted the world to see. Check your accounts. The doorman didn't question Mrs. Whitmore leaving at 3 a.m. with only a purse. In that world, the wealthy came and went as they pleased. The October air struck my face, cold, sharp, liberating. Behind me, 23 floors up. Ashton slept in his chair, unaware that his wife had just launched the first move in a battle he didn't know had already begun. Within 6 hours, he'd wake to find his accounts drained and the FBI closing in. When the Uber driver asked my destination, I gave an address that was finally my own. The car dropped me at the Warwick Hotel as dawn turned Manhattan's glass towers gold. I paid in cash, walked through the lobby without looking back, and took the elevator to the 12th floor. From my window, I could see our building, his building. I ordered room service, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, and strong coffee. The ordinary normality of it felt almost unreal. At 6:52, I opened my laptop, watching the joint accounts, knowing the banks would alert Ashton the moment they opened. At 7 sharp, I refreshed the page. The automatic transfers processed exactly as Patricia had arranged, triggered by my official change of residence. $17 million redistributed under New York matrimonial law, half of everything. The prenup he'd thought would protect him had, in truth, secured my rights. My phone lit up at 7:03, Ashton's photo, taken on our wedding day when he still believed he was untouchable. I let it ring to voicemail. By 7:15, there were 9 missed calls. I turned on the recorder and played each message aloud. Mila, what's happening? The bank called. There's an issue with our accounts. This isn't funny. Call me back before the markets open. What did you do? You're destroying everything we built. Please, we can fix this. You don't understand the position you're putting me in. They're freezing everything. The FBI is here. God, please answer. By noon, his voice had collapsed from control to desperation. The 47th call came from his lawyer. Mrs. Whitmore, this is James Calaman. Your husband has retained me to discuss the irregular movement of marital assets. I hung up and blocked the number. Then I called Patricia. They're panicking, she said, a smile audible in her tone. Everything we did was legal. Those assets were joint. You had full withdrawal rights, and we followed the law precisely. He can contest it, but it'll take months. And by then, he'll have far bigger problems. That evening, I ate dinner in my room. Perfectly cooked salmon, the first meal I'd actually tasted in months. When a news alert appeared, I turned on the TV and switched to CNN. The footage was brutal and beautiful. Richard Whitmore led from his mansion in handcuffs, his silver hair disheveled, his armor of tailored suits replaced by a wrinkled shirt. FBI agents carried boxes of evidence past the cameras. Margaret's meticulous records of 40 years of corruption. Federal authorities arrested hedge fund mogul Richard Whitmore this morning, the reporter said. After a years-long investigation into insider trading, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Sources cite multiple whistleblowers and detailed documentation spanning decades. My phone buzzed. A message from Margaret, just a champagne bottle emoji. From a woman who had never used one before, who had served those men coffee while quietly recording their crimes. It said everything. Justice had finally arrived at Richard Whitmore's door. 3 weeks passed in an unfamiliar calm. I met with FBI agents, gave testimony, and watched as the empire disintegrated in real time from the quiet safety of my hotel room. Nathan fled to Switzerland. Graham Chin pled guilty immediately, hoping for leniency. Other partners turned state's evidence, each scrambling to betray the others for reduced sentences. Then, on a Thursday evening, Ashton found me. I was at the Ritz-Carlton bar, drinking champagne I bought myself, money I'd earned from trades he'd assumed were harmless hobbies. He looked like a ghost in an expensive suit, unshaven, hollow-eyed, his Tom Ford jacket creased as if he'd slept in it. You destroyed everything, he said, standing too close, the smell of whiskey heavy between us. I turned toward him, calm and steady. I revealed everything. There's a difference. He frowned. We had a life. You had a life, I replied. I had a role in your performance. I sipped my champagne before adding, You once said I wouldn't last a week without you. It's been 21 days, and you're the one falling apart. He tried to grab my wrist, but I pulled back. You don't understand what you've done, he said, voice cracking. My father's facing 20 years. The fund is gone. Everything is exactly what you built. A house of cards, I said. I just stopped pretending it was solid. His face twisted with rage. He raised his voice. Security arrived moments later, escorting him out as he shouted about lawyers and lawsuits. The bartender returned, polished a glass, and placed a fresh flute of champagne before me. On the house, she said with a faint smile. That was long overdue. 2 days later, Diana and I testified, on the same day, by coincidence. She looked stronger than ever, no longer the timid woman who'd wilted at dinner parties. We sat silently in the courthouse hallway, understanding everything without words. Margaret's testimony came last. It spanned 3 days. She presented proof for everything. Every bribe, every threat, every woman they ruined. She recounted Elena's crash, Caroline's institutionalization, Jennifer's fabricated bankruptcy. She delivered 4 decades of evidence with the precision of someone who'd been waiting her entire life for justice. Why did you keep all this? The prosecutor asked. Margaret adjusted her glasses, fixing her gaze on Richard at the defense table. Because I knew one day someone would be brave enough to use it. Someone like Mrs. Hawthorne. You mean Mrs. Whitmore? The prosecutor clarified. No, Margaret said firmly. Miss Hawthorne. She took back her name, and everything else. That night, Patricia called. Margaret's evidence alone guarantees convictions, she said. Satisfaction clear in her tone. Richard will never walk free again. Ashton's looking at 15 to 20. I stood at my hotel window, watching the city lights. Those towers would keep standing long after the Whitmore empire had turned to dust. They looked smaller from Patricia's office a few days later. Or maybe I was simply seeing them differently now. She slid a document across her desk, the final divorce decree. It weighed nothing, but changed everything. The ruling came this morning, she said, smiling. The house, 60% of the remaining assets, and your separate property, all yours. 3 days earlier, the courtroom had been full. Ashton sat beside his lawyer, wearing the same suit from our wedding, now hanging loosely on him. His lawyer, Kellerman, had tried one last argument. Mrs. Whitmore benefited from these alleged crimes. She lived in luxury from their proceeds. Patricia stood smoothly, opened her laptop, and played a recording from Ashton's own voice recorder, dated 14 months earlier. His voice echoed through the courtroom. Arrogant, dismissive, she wouldn't understand a financial statement if I drew her pictures. That's the beauty of marrying someone decorative, too stupid to ask questions. Judge Catherine Chin, unimpressed, looked directly at him. Mr. Whitmore, it seems you misjudged your wife's intelligence. Perhaps if you hadn't, you might have been more careful with your crimes. Now, holding the decree, I signed my name, Mila Hawthorne, on every line Patricia indicated. Each signature felt like reclaiming a part of myself I'd forgotten. The whistleblower reward clears next week. Patricia added, between yours and Margaret's, you'll have more than enough to move forward. Margaret waited for me in the lobby, wearing a tailored suit, the first time I'd seen her out of uniform. We walked 2 blocks to the building that once housed Ashton's fund. The directory still had a blank space where Whitmore Capital Management had been. 3rd floor, Margaret said, pressing the elevator button. The landlord gave us a deal. Apparently, a foundation for abuse survivors looks better than empty offices. The space was modest, 4 rooms, once a dental practice, but the windows faced east, flooding the rooms with morning light. It felt fitting to build our future above the ruins of his empire. Phoenix Foundation. Margaret read from the temporary sign we'd hung earlier that day, rising from ashes. Our first client arrived that afternoon, Jennifer Chin, wife of a pharmaceutical executive accused of falsifying trial data. She held a folder of documents tightly, her voice trembling as she said, "My husband says I'm paranoid." Margaret and I exchanged a look. We knew exactly where to begin. "He says I wouldn't understand the science anyway," Mrs. Chin murmured. Margaret leaned forward, her 4 decades of experience distilled into calm certainty. "Every document tells a story, Mrs. Chin. We're just here to help you write a new ending." 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mother called. "I'm coming to visit," she announced. "Not a question, but a decision. I need to see my daughter." I'd settled into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Nothing like the penthouse, but full of light. The kitchen was tiny yet functional, and I'd started learning to cook properly for the first time. Mom arrived with 1 suitcase and countless questions she was too polite to ask. I met her at JFK in my used Honda, reliable, practical, and anonymous. "You look different," she said as we sat in traffic. "Younger, lighter somehow." That week we didn't speak about Ashton, the trial, or the untouched money waiting in accounts. We talked about the foundation, about Margaret's quiet humor, and the women who came to us carrying secrets heavy as stones. On Thanksgiving, I cooked dinner myself, a slightly dry turkey, perfect stuffing, and cranberry sauce from a can, because some traditions should remain. Mom watched me move comfortably around my kitchen, something I'd never been in that penthouse. "You're happy," she said softly. "I'm free," I replied, then added, "which might be the same thing." She stayed another week, sleeping in the guest room I painted sage green, reading while I worked on cases. On her last night, she hugged me like she used to before I learned to fake happiness. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. "Not for surviving him, but for becoming you." 6 months later, spring arrived in Brooklyn. I stood in the doorway of the house, my house now, only there to sign the last of the paperwork. The rooms echoed with emptiness. Ashton's belongings long cleared by movers his mother had hired. My phone rang. Margaret's voice sounded more alive than ever. "We have a new client," she said. "Senator Williams's wife. She's been documenting campaign finance violations for 2 years." I looked down at the keys in my hand. The ones I'd left were claimed and earned. They felt heavier now, filled with purpose instead of vengeance. Outside, I saw Madison Hayes walking with her new fiancé. Not Ashton, now serving 3 to 5 years, but a man her own age who held her hand with care. "Ready for round 2?" Margaret asked. I thought about the 17 women who'd come to us in the past few months, 4 who had safely left their marriages with their assets intact, 13 still collecting courage and evidence, each one learning, as I had, that freedom isn't given, it's taken, one document at a time. I was born ready, I told Margaret, closing the door on the empty house. I just hadn't realized it until someone tried to convince me I was nothing. The lock clicked shut with finality. I walked to my Honda and tossed the estate keys to the agent who would sell that monument to Ashton's ego. The proceeds would keep the Phoenix Foundation running for at least another year. As I drove back to Brooklyn, to my smaller, warmer life, I thought about Elena, Caroline, Jennifer, and all the others who came before us. Women who had been silenced or erased, but whose stories, preserved by Margaret, had saved me. Now, Margaret and I were saving others, one woman, one signature at a time, building a bridge from the ashes of an empire we'd helped destroy. My phone buzzed with a message from Diana. "Coffee tomorrow? I have someone you should meet. She needs our help." I smiled, merging into traffic, heading home, my real home. Not a marble cage with a doorman, but a life that was simple, quiet, and fully my own. If Mila's story of deliberate revenge and renewal inspired you, hit that like button. My favorite moment? When she lined up those keys on the granite counter and never looked back. What was yours? Tell me in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories like this one.